Welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapenton. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, do we have a treat of a show for you this evening? In fact, tonight's topic was suggested to us and inspired by our chief ticketing agent, Mr. Kev Spirited. Mr. Spirited suggested that Jeremy and I do a program delving into the topic of Sharia law or Islamic law and determine whether it is at all compatible with the natural law principles contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Now, I admit that this was a bit of a challenge because I just wanted to pop up with the joke that, Sharia law, right off the bat, unconstitutional, goodbye. But I am resisting the temptation because there is actually a fair amount that goes into Sharia law that really does need to be discussed. And we will actually discuss the various ways in which it is incompatible with our United States Constitution. So, to get started, we first have to define what exactly Sharia law is. Sharia law is the spiritual law of Islam, which governs Muslims and non-Muslims alike. It governs the conduct of its subjects in a wide array of issues ranging from banking and finance, marriage, diet, and even personal hygiene. As you all know, Muslims are prohibited from eating pork. That would be an example of their dietary law. And there are a bunch of other things with respect to Sharia law that really is rather archaic and draconian in its application and scope. So, what then actually makes up Sharia law? Well, it's a complex legal code with differing interpretations. In fact, I believe they call the differing legal schools of thought in Sharia fiqhwas. I really don't know how to pronounce it, but we'll just stick with fiqhwas. And these range in the scope and application of how it works, from all the way to strict interpretation of the law to a more liberal based. But again, it is not all that liberally based. But the two sources of Sharia law, the two main ones, are the Quran, which is considered the highest form of law, and they state that this is an infallible source of law with respect to Sharia law, and that means that any decision that is handed down by an Islamic Sharia law court cannot, by its nature, be questioned. So in other words, whatever is said is basically like it's written on concrete. It cannot be changed. Just absolutely cannot be changed. And then the second is something known as the Sunnah, which is a series of teachings based on the life experiences of Muhammad. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting, especially when there's a division between the Shia and the Sunni. And as you can tell by the name Sunni Muslims, they are practically wedded to the idea of the Sunnah. Now, we all know that Muhammad was known as the prophet of the sword, and therefore anything with respect to Sharia law will be violent by its nature. And we see this, and we'll get into more details with that when we get to criminal law, but in the sort of violent, draconian approaches. And just right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind, even though in almost every scope and application, Sharia law is contrary to the natural law principles contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, the fact that they have these draconian punishments would be violative of the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. And I think that this is perhaps one of the first areas that we ought to jump into, because Sharia law is very hierarchical in its application, and yet it's also very inflexible in its application as well. And therefore, it really does create a rift that is not based on justice. It's based off of this Islamic religious fervor, and that, too, is incongruous with our First Amendment guarantee of freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof. Well, Sharia law does not allow for the free exercise of religion, and already we're seeing the attempts to mold it. Just look at what happened in Paris, France on this last Friday. That horrific attack on one of the jewels of the West, which has a long and illustrious history that stretches back to antiquity. These are the same monsters that want to force everyone to adhere by Sharia law. And I think that I am perfectly capable of speaking for Jeremy and I on this in saying that Sharia law, when you look at its actual framework, its definition, its application, has no place in the free world. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Jeremy now so that he can also jump in on this, because, you know, we want you to be empowered with the knowledge of our Constitution, and this is just one of the areas where it really speaks out against the way our Constitution works and has no place being here.
Well, the problem I have, and I think it's just an obvious one, all the inconsistencies that go with this. You have all these individuals that want to come out and say, well, we have to be tolerant of them, because if we're not tolerant of them, we're not respecting their religion. But these same individuals, and you want to talk about with the Constitution, these same individuals say, well, what about separation of church and state? Well, Sharia law doesn't allow that, because Sharia law enforces one religion that you have to adhere to, and if you don't, you are, what does it say in their Quran? Smite them at the neck or at the head if they choose not to or shall not convert. So all these tolerant individuals that they want to kowtow to them and say, well, you have to be tolerant. No, because of the same people who want to say, well, we know our rights, we have rights in the separation of church and state, blah, all this other crap. You know, enough of it. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. I'm sure I'm not the only American that's sick of it, and I'm sure I'm not the only individual in the world that's sick and tired of this. As Randy mentioned, it's violation of the Eighth Amendment. First of all, Sharia law cannot exist here in the United States anyways. It is unenforceable. because it would impede and infringe upon our supreme law of the land, the Constitution. So you cannot have two rules of law governing over and being enforceable over the citizens of that country. Now, if these individuals want Sharia law in this country, I'll tell you what, pack up and get out of our country. We don't want you here because you're not going to subvert our Constitution and laws and standards. It's not going to work. It can't work. It's impossible to work. So, I'm just of the mindset, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Again, that individual Sharia law, you're never going to happen. It can't happen. We've seen now. I think the count for states up to 15 or 17 state governors now have said, no, we're not going to have these refugees, these Syrian refugees come in, because there's no way we could possibly know if they're terrorists or not. Even if they're assumed to be terrorists, you have to be completely sure, 100% absolutely sure that they are not going to commit acts of terrorism. How can you be so sure? The best way, don't even allow them to come here. Don't even allow them in the country.
Right, and it's got to be that way because that's one of their duties is to stand there and protect the American people, and particularly with the governors, it's their duty to respect and to keep secure their own constituents. And the problem that we're running into with this. With these so-called refugees is, if I'm not mistaken, there were a great number of those terrorist barbarians who carried out that dastardly attack in Paris on Friday who were in fact Syrian refugees. Why in the world would we want to allow these people in? That's just absolute insanity, especially when there is no vetting process. And yet, what does Obama and his regime do? They come out and say that we need to hasten the process of letting these people into our country. That's just absolute absurdity. It's madness.
He's in direct violation of the Constitution of doing that to begin with, because Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution specifically states that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. That's all this is, folks. This refugee status that they're attaching to this is their politically correct way of saying invasion. They sweeten it up by making it sound like, well, they're refugees. They're labeling them as victims of demise in their own homelands. Now let's look at these refugees. 95% of them are male between the ages of 17 and 35 years old. Where's all the women and children, the elderly? Where are they at? And even the women and children and the elderly, I don't even want them to come here because they have been used before as pawns.
Not only pawns, but weapons.
What exactly? Well, thinking of chess with the pawns, you send the pawns out to die first. So,
absolutely.
And that's what they do. So how can anybody, if these individuals do not want to be victims? See, to me, I don't think they don't want to be victims. I think they're following along with this. They're going along with it because they want this to happen. These women and children and elderly. So if they really don't want to be victims, and if they are true victims in all of this, why don't they stand up and fight against it? Because they don't want to. And people will make the excuse for them, well, they're afraid to do it because if they don't, well, they're going to die anyways. That's just the way it is. Either they stand up and fight and defend their lives and die defending their own life and their freedom away from this tyrannical regime of this so-called religion, or they succumb to it, they allow themselves to succumb to it, and they're used as weapons and thrown out there on the front lines so that something bigger can happen. To me, I don't think they're victims. I don't believe any of them are innocent. I can't honestly believe that because
Yeah,
there's no proof to substantiate that they're not innocent.
right. And, another part of it is, Jeremy, they're being cynical about all of this. They're sitting there trying to say that, pointing to the numbers, inflating the numbers using the Christians that have been wiped out in that region, and saying this is why they need refugee status. Except, why? Why is that the case when the Christians have been selected for wholesale slaughter? Where were these refugees in standing up against that? Where were they in saying, no, you can't do this, this goes against our entire history, policy, what have you? Well, the reason they aren't stepping up for it is because Islam says that you can wipe out the non-believer, that you can lie to the non-believer, and that you can treat them in any way you want to. And yes, and that comes in with this idea of how the application of Sharia law actually works. See, Sharia lists different types of approaches for people. In fact, within the Quran, their application of it says that if you are a non-believer, you are only worth half as much as a Muslim. You are only worth half as much as a believer. In fact, even in the way their civil court works, if you are even allowed to bring a claim at all, you can only recover half as much. Or if you're if you follow the Jewish faith, then you can only recover 1/16 as much in some of the fiqhs, and then if the Muslims want to sue you, they can recover full amount. They basically say that you are not a full human if you don't follow the religion of the Prophet of the Sword. That is just disgusting. And that violates equal protection under the law.
Absolutely.
Why would anyone want to bring that kind of a system here in the United States? But the sick thing of it is, ladies and gentlemen, is that they are actually starting to bring it in limited forms and fashions, say for family law. Well, no. If you open the door to Sharia law, you are working to delegitimize the natural law applications that are steadfast with respect to our United States Constitution. And you just can't do that because it is going to create a floodgate. If you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And we're already seeing that with some of the refugees in Germany. They were given a choice to live out in the country. I believe it was out in the Black Forest. They were given houses. They said, no, this isn't good enough. We want to be in the city. Now, that brings up this old adage of beggars can't be choosers. Why are they so willing to sit there and whine about their accommodations when they are supposedly fleeing for their lives? It makes no sense to me.
Sure. And, going back to another part of the Constitution, and by the way, this whole influx of, violating the equal protection under the law, to a certain degree, that's kind of what was one of the hinge pins of slavery being abolished. So here it is, history's repeating itself, except this time, instead of abolishing something in a way, they're reenacting or recreating slavery, is what they're doing. Because now it's not politically correct again, and this is the bastard head of the political correctness machine that they want to implement. It's not politically correct to be intolerable of them. So everybody's so worried about being politically incorrect about this. Now they have that tentacle wrapped around the Constitution and strangling it because people are afraid to stand up and speak out. And because people are afraid to stand up and speak out, what's going to happen? That President Obama, Adolf Obama wants 10,000 Syrian refugees to come into the United States over the next fiscal year. 10,000. Where's it going to stop? It needs to stop now. There have already been at least 2,000 brought in. they need to be packed up and shipped right back out. Because
yeah, and Paris certainly proves that.
Absolutely.
Because if you stop and think about it, what they did in Paris is exactly what they would want to do in the United States. ISIS has said as much, and we've already seen a concrete connection. So there really is no reason why we should be opening the floodgates to these these destructive savages. There really is no other way to describe them other than savages. And I know that's not politically correct to say, but at this point, I don't care.
So what? So what?
Yeah.
And my
the lifeblood of our country is at risk.
And my whole point is, again, when does it stop? They bring in 10,000. Well, next fiscal year, let's bring in 100,000. Let's bring in 100 million. It will never end. And what happens is, because people are afraid of being politically correct, if they're not politically correct, you're going to be ostracized. Oh, you're going to lose your job. This is going to happen. You won't be able to do. You know what? There's nothing on this earth that is more sacred and more pristine than our individual rights, freedoms, and liberties endowed to us by God Almighty. Period. We should never, ever forfeit those or cast them aside just because of what? Being tolerant to somebody? Define tolerance. Are they tolerant when they behead Christians over in the Middle East? Absolutely not. Are they tolerant when they want to put up films and videos of saying, we have a list of cities that we're going to attack next? Were they tolerant in Paris when they had individuals, 7 of them or 8 of them, detonate themselves and take out a mass population of people? No. These individuals know nothing about tolerance, and they are banking on our government and any other government that wants to embrace tolerance for them for their devious actions. This is how slavery is going to happen again. It's not going to be them that's the slaves. It's going to be we the people. It's going to be the free and sovereign individual that will no longer be free and sovereign, because there will be too many of them if this allows to happen.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned slavery. That's another thing. Sharia law does not outlaw slavery. In fact, that's why there is this strict hierarchical system.
They embrace it.
Yeah, and essentially what they're saying is, if you don't follow the religion of Islam, the religion of the Prophet of the Sword, that's why I get so mad when they keep saying that it is a religion of peace. Nothing could be further from the truth. When Muhammad kept riding out there, when he was pillaging city after city, country after country, saying that he was the prophet of the sword, does that sound peaceful? Absolutely not. And so if they don't view you as a full human because you don't follow their religion, that tells you pretty much all you need to know with respect to this twisted excuse for a law. I can't even call Sharia law law. It's not. It's a religious code that is fanatical, and it is destructive. It is barbarism in no uncertain terms. And I can't mince my words with that, because that is exactly what it is. What they want to do is to drag us back to a medieval way of thought, a medieval lifestyle. They want to purge modern thought, and not just modern thought, but the natural law tenets of our shared United States Constitution, because what you find in that is liberty, equality, that whole adage about the United States being a nation of laws and not of men. Well, what that is talking to is about the equal application of the law, and clearly Sharia law does not follow that. I mean, how could you say that it was an equal application of the law if you treat non-believers differently, if you treat somebody differently just because they're gender? Now, I know that almost sounds like what these utopian socialists say, but it's not quite the same. What I'm getting at is not this idea of there's a patriarchy that's keeping women down. No, there is no such thing as patriarchy, because under the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, all people are equal. That's just the way it is. The law applies equally. So there cannot be this mythical patriarchy. that they speak of. But under Sharia law, women are not considered human. They're considered chattel property. In other words, they are considered slaves. And so there comes your 13th Amendment right then and there.
Yes, and I want to speak again about these states that have flat out pretty much said there's not going to be any Syrian refugees. A lot of people, even a spokesman for the White House, came out and said, "Well, we have a very strong and strict vetting process to make sure that they're okay to come in and they're not terrorists and this and that, and we don't believe it to be legal for the states to be able to do this, but we're consulting lawyers about it." No need to consult a lawyer for the simple fact Article 4, Section 4 demands that the United States protect the other states, individual states, from invasion. And since they're the ones welcoming them in and pushing for this, the states under Article 1, I'm sorry, when I misspoke, it was Article 4, Section 4, that the United States government is obligated under. Under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, it says, "No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with any other state, or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded, or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay." Meaning that if the United States government falls short of their obligation under Article 4, Section 4, it falls strictly on the states to preserve the sanctity and the sovereignty of those individual states. And who is the commander-in-chief of the states? That would be the governor. So the governors are absolutely within their legal means and constitutional authority of stopping this and prohibiting them from coming into the states. And if the United States government doesn't like it, all the states have to do is say, well, guess what? No more federal no more funding will go to you. We will not turn over any money to you. Period.
Right, basically the reverse of the tax and spending clause. And then
Correct.
Just looking at it within the federal government itself, I mean, here we have the president saying he's just going to use his phone and his pen to bring in all these Syrian refugees. But immigration law is, and don't get me wrong, that is a type of immigration law. Any type of immigration and naturalization law, that is expressly enumerated to the legislative branch. Last I checked, Obama ain't been in the legislature since 2007. I guess he struggles with this idea that he is no longer a legislator, that he is no longer a senator, and that he is now the supposed chief executive of the United States. Yet, as the chief executive of the United States, he is doing everything that is diametrically opposed to the benefit of the American people. He is in direct violation of his oath of office, and yet the gutless opposition party has done nothing to stop him. And so when the states sit there and see that the federal government is not operating within the confines of the United States Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2 kicks in. And they say, look, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. If the federal government is not acting within its purported duties, then it falls upon our shoulders to do this. Just as you were saying with Article 1, Section 10, absolutely it falls to the state governments. And then as the 10th Amendment says, if this power is not expressly delegated to the federal government, then it automatically goes back to the states and the people respectively. So again, the Constitution speaks as to how this should be done, but our current political powers that be are just ignoring the Constitution because they see a political expediency coming out of this. They see a way for them to score political points, and once again, it is at the expense of we the people. Well, that we cannot tolerate that. We cannot stand for it. We cannot allow a Paris to happen here. We cannot allow a repeat of 9/11. Why? Why, oh why, would our government do this? Well, it is because they want to replace us. They want to create this weak population that has no idea of what their Constitution is. And hey, these would be your frontline soldiers for wiping out those Americans who are willing to stand up for and defend their fundamental and unalienable rights, as is the duty and obligation that attaches to those rights.
Well, I think we just truly and unequivocally defined exactly what Obama meant when he said, I want to fundamentally change the United States. There it is right there. He wants to eliminate the sovereignty of the individual citizen and bring us down to the level of which is beneath us. And the thing is, people need to realize, and Randy knows as well as many of you out there know, I'm not a politically correct individual by any stretch of the means. As far as I'm concerned, the United States, since its inception, has been the big dog on the block. And we've acted like it. We've shown that we're the big dog on the block. Since when, in the history of our nation, our 235 years or 227 years as a nation, have we ever bowed to anybody? Not until this individual has taken office, usurped the Constitution, and the authority granted to the presidency under it, have we bowed to anybody. Now, I don't bow to anybody. I bow to no one. Randy bows to no one. You, our listeners, should bow to no one, because it is not in our constitutional makeup and within our natural God-given rights to do so. We have the right as individuals for freedom and liberty and all that entails with that. And the second anybody bows to another individual, think about what kind of message that sends to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is actually laughing at us.
They're in shock and pain, like in Paris.
Yes.
When you look at what's happening in Paris, they're in pain because there's no leadership in America. Now, we could sit here and say that Paris brought, or not just Paris, but France brought this upon themselves because of their very loose policies with these so-called refugees, but I'm not going to go there because no one deserves to have happen what happened in Paris on Friday. Now, should their leadership be held accountable for these screw-ups?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And, Francois Hollande, an avowed socialist, has actually come out and said that he's going to make these people suffer. If we had an attack like that here on the United States, Obama wouldn't. He wouldn't. Because remember what happened after the Fort Hood shooting with Nadal Hassan, another proponent.
The workplace violence?
Yes. That's exactly where I was going. And remember, Nadal Hassan, when he was standing up, said he didn't want any court representation. You know why? Because under Sharia law, you are not provided with the right to have counsel. You're supposed to represent yourself. And see, there's another aspect of Sharia law that is just completely contradictory to the United States Constitution, absolutely contrary to it. Your Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights are just thrown out the window with it. There is no protection against self-incrimination. There is no presumption of guilt until you're proven no presumption of innocence until you're proven guilty. Rather, you are presumed guilty unless you can show by the laws of Allah that you are innocent. I mean, that is a backward system that would never work here in the United States. And to even have the idea that we could bring in or implement any part of Sharia law really starts to open the floodgate. It's as Jeremy was saying with respect to the refugees that would be coming into the country. Where does it stop? Where do we stop? When we open the doors to our justice system and our legal system to this foreign, alien, and detrimental legal system, where does it stop? Does it just stop with family law? Or do we have to now say that if a daughter shames her father, it's okay for him to do an honor killing? Because that too is part of Sharia law. And again, that would just be flat out murder here in the United States and in any civilized country, but not under the auspices of Sharia law. And this is what they want to unleash upon our country. It is terrifying, it is unconstitutional, it is downright un-American.
And see, here's the other thing. This is what I want our listeners, and whoever listens to this, to understand. Our founding fathers are the individuals that came here and declared their freedom from the crown. You know, there are similarities that happened within the legal system under the crown. You were actually given legal counsel, but it was someone who represented the crown that represented you and was basically there to make sure that, you know, everything went down, the judgment came down the way that the crown wanted it to. Okay? With Sharia law, they took it to the next level. You're supposed to represent yourself. You don't get any legal representation. See, we declared our independence from the world superpower at that time for much less than what is going to happen under Sharia law, or what has happened under Sharia law in other countries. Why are people so worried about standing up and saying, no, it's not happening here, we're not going to allow it? Individuals want this to happen. They support this. We have individuals at college campuses, and I know Randy's talked about this on a couple of other episodes, that are holding up signs that say the real terrorists are the United States military. Really? So these individuals, women like that, want to support, have signs like that. You are giving aid and comfort to our enemy of the United States. These individuals, these terrorists, they are enemy combatants. They are declared enemies of the United States. And when you make statements like that, you are giving them aid and comfort, because they are taking what you are saying as comforting solace that you support them.
Because, and could you imagine what would happen to somebody like Jessica Jin? That one that wanted to cock up with her Glock, her strap-on protection. If she did that under Sharia law, they'd stone her. They would literally kill her through the biblical process of stoning. These people have no idea the type of demons that they are about to unleash upon the civilized world. Paris is but a start. Paris is but a start. Now, I know I had said in my episode about it that 150 people had been killed. That was what was being reported at the time. I think they've adjusted that number down to, what is it, about 120 something now?
Something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get that correction out. But that was 120 people. Granted, that was the worst attack on French soil since World War II. We're talking the worst attack in 70 years. But remember when 9/11 happened, we lost over 3,000 Americans. If they could pull something like that off again, they would not stop or hesitate. So why are we going to slit our own throats with this moronic doctrine of political correctness to allow this basically perverted ideology to come into our country? It makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, and the whole thing is, again, for the life of me, I cannot understand why anybody who has a right mind, and I'm being kind of facetious here, would even, adopt such an idea of even garnering any support for them whatsoever. The media wants to throw out and call individuals like you and I, and many of our listeners, Islamophobes. Well, let's break that down. I've been on this kick lately of taking terminology and phrases and breaking them down. Illegal immigration. Oxymoron. You can't do something that's legal in an illegal fashion. That's like saying I'm going to go out and legally murder somebody. You can't do it because murder isn't an illegal act. You can't do it legally. Therefore, you cannot do a legal act in an illegal fashion. It's vice versa, where it's a two-way street. But they want to call us Islamophobes. Well, let's look at this. Islamophobia, the fear of Islam. What in the hell do we have to fear with these people? Nothing. Nothing. If people want to adopt this ideology of being afraid of them, why? We shouldn't be afraid of anybody. Again, we are the United States of America. We gained our independence from the world superpower. Not once, but twice. We took it the first time, and then we beat them back the second time. And they haven't messed with us since. It's time, these troglodytes, that's what these individuals are. Sure. These Islamic terrorists, they're troglodytes. And for those of you who don't know what a troglodyte is, it's a very simple terminology. They're cave dwellers. They're primitive. They're barbaric and savage.
They're worse than that. They're pond scum. They're really pond scum. The way that their ideology works, the way that they want to enforce a caste system here, America will never be based on a caste system. We fought against a type of caste system known as nobility. Remember, Thomas Paine said that the worst type of governmental system ever devised by the hands of man is the monarchy. To say that someone just by title of birth, title of blood, and that's where your corruption of blood comes in, by the way, folks, can be at the heights of power, or someone who believes something can be at the heights of power, that is wicked. It is wicked because it goes against the natural law tenet that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights which no legitimate earthly governmental authority at any level has the rightful authority to encroach upon, to strip away, to abridge, or to deny. And that is what we fought against. So why would we now, some 230 plus years after the birth of our nation, the greatest nation on the face of God's green earth, would we turn around and bow down to a medieval philosophy that would plunge us back into the Dark Ages? That is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But it shows exactly what these political elitists want. They want to destabilize us. That's why they won't close the border. That's why they won't protect us from illegal aliens. You know, that is one of the few enumerated duties to the federal government that the federal government is just outright ignoring. Outright ignoring. Well, when they outright ignore the law and leave us vulnerable to these sorts of attacks, they are a rogue government, not acting in the best interest of the American people. And who does the responsibility fall to when the government doesn't act? Well, if first the federal government doesn't act, then it falls to the states. Then if the states fail to act as a representative body of the people, then it falls directly to the people. And that is the language that is contained within the 10th Amendment. But with Sharia law, you don't have that. Sharia law is based off of a collective. It is for the collective embetterment of Islam, for the spread of Islam, for the enforcement of Islam. You know, if you, they say if you quote unquote blaspheme the prophet, then you should be put to death. That's clearly against free speech. Folks, you'd have no free speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of association, no freedom of press, no right to keep or bear firearms because they wouldn't want you to be able to defend yourselves against them, and you'd have none of any of the fundamental and unalienable rights that are naturally endowed to us by our Creator. And if we're going to just bow down and capitulate to this due to the cancerous doctrine of political correctness, then we would be committing national suicide. And that is what President Obama wants the United States of America to do, because he hates us so much. There really is no other way to describe it, because even after all this Paris stuff happened, he's pushing to accelerate the opening of the floodgates for these so-called refugees, and at the same time he's speaking out of the other side of his mouth saying that ISIS has been contained. If ISIS has been contained, I don't want to know what their uncontained would look like, because if they're contained and killing 120 people in Paris, what does that say? Tells me they're not contained at all.
Sure, and I'm actually gonna, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a rant here. I'm going to start it by saying this. I don't care who anybody is. I will say anything and everything that I want about the Prophet Muhammad that I want to say. And if people don't like it, so what? So what? You don't like it? Pack up your belongings, vacate your homes, and move out of my country. Period. If you don't like me speaking that way about Muhammad, I don't care. Because I guarantee there's nobody out there big enough that's going to stop me. And if anybody tries, guess what? It just means that I've already succeeded. Now, secondly, here's the thing. We talk about, you talk about the, with Thomas Paine and the monarchical system being the most detrimental thing to a political system or government. Well, let's look at it this way, by birthright. Well, we have to start taking things like that and utilizing them. We have to fight fire with fire. I made mention to my father and various other individuals that there's a simple way of doing this. We have, and Randy, I believe you and I had this conversation as well. Let's look at history, okay? Let's look at the most prolific and iconic individual, the most persuasive individual in the 20th century, Adolf Hitler. Look at everything that he did, okay? Everything that he did, all the tactics he used for the agenda that he had to put out there to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, it was all for evil. But the tactics, there's no discernment between good or evil with the tactics. It's how the tactics are used. This is what we have to do, folks. We have to get downright nasty with these individuals, and we have to start using those certain types of tactics, not for evil purposes, but for the security and the sanctity of our own freedoms. We need to start saying, you know what? We do have a birthright. We are United States citizens. We are United States citizens that have rights that will not be denied to us by anybody. They will not be taken away, and we have to act on it. If we have to get downright nasty and use that, that is our birthright. We were born here in the United States. We're born under the greatest document that has ever been penned by man, the longest contiguous document of any political system that has actually worked of its kind. We have to utilize that. We have to start fighting fire with fire. Start using tactics.
Right, right. And we also have to wake up and say, you know what? I'm not going to be ashamed to claim I'm an American citizen.
Absolutely.
If somebody in the world has a problem with that, that's their problem. Because not only is it a birthright we have, it is the greatest birthright that any people can have on the face of the planet. Because the United States Constitution is truly a natural law document. And again, let's look at another part of Sharia law and explain how it doesn't apply with our Constitution. It could never be compatible with it. You know, under Islam, you have no right to a jury trial. None. None whatsoever. And therefore, again, that denies you the same type of rights that you would have here, because under Islam, a jury is viewed as corrupt. The only one that would be judging you other than the judge would be Allah himself. And I'm sorry, but I don't want a false idol moon god passing judgment on me. You know what that would be called? That's lunacy. And only lunatics would bow down to the moon god.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And here's the other thing that I wanted to get to. All of these supporters, all of these tolerant individuals, anytime you bring up the fact that what they're supporting is completely unconstitutional, their first rebuttal and retort to it is, well, the Constitution is an antiquated document. Really?
How can something that's timeless be antiquated?
Exactly. But see, here's the thing. They want to support the very thing that takes us back in time to a rule of law that is more antiquated than the United States Constitution. And they'll support that, but yet the United States Constitution is antiquated. They defeat themselves at every turn when they make statements like that.
Sure, because they're playing a game of semantics. Going back to the first thing that we said on our opening episode, which was back on September 11th of 2015, and let me reiterate a part of that before I jump into this point that I'm about to make. We did that to say we will not bow down to these savages. We will not give up our way of life for the doctrine of political correctness. But, when they sit there and say that, oh, well, there's a war on women, what about Islam? What about these people that you are wanting to welcome in, where you can be killed for showing your face if you're a woman? I'm sorry, but isn't that a bit contradictory? And that's the problem. The radical and extreme left operates on raw and sheer emotionalism. There is no logic behind their arguments, because if there was logic behind their arguments, they wouldn't be contradicting themselves. But they are. And it just goes to show that they try and paint this little mythical picture that, oh, well, Jihad Johnny over there, who's going to go blow himself up, is just misunderstood. He's poor, and he has been robbed by the American people. But last I checked, Dr. Ayman Zawahiri was a physician, well-educated, not poor. Osama bin Laden was a rather wealthy man, very wealthy, in fact, and used his wealth to attack the West, and he too was well-educated. Let's see, Dr. Yasser Arafat, he too was well-educated, and yet engaged in terrorist tactics. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There is no truth to the line of propaganda that they have been forcing upon us in order to make us the villain. You see, they almost want it to be like a dime novel, the 19th century dime novels filled with tall tales. They want to make America to be the dark, bad villain that's out to kill everyone. But nothing could be further from the truth. Instead, they turn to these terrorists that embrace a medieval ideology, a legal system that has its roots back in the 700s, and then tear down the longest contiguous constitution in the history of the world. That is insanity.
Well, it falls right in line with the tenets of, the principles of propaganda. They do it with the labeling. They say, well, the Constitution's antiquated. It's not relevant anymore. It has to be changed. It's a living document. Wah. I want to go ride a unicorn bareback. They need to stop. Because the simple fact is, what they're doing is utilizing principles of propaganda. They're using Cloward and Piven. They're using the Communist Manifesto, Mein Kampf, all of these books on political theory and ideology, and they're mashing them all together for what purpose? To completely distraught and disenfranchise individuals, especially our youth. And I'm willing to bet we're going to even do a show on disenfranchised youth, and we'll jump into that on another episode.
Yeah, I think our chief ticket agent really wants in on that.
Yeah, and that's fine. Welcome aboard. So here's the thing: when they make these claims, well, it's a war on women. Really? So now you're going to take something that it's nothing more than complete asinine projection on their part. because now
You're absolutely right.
they're the ones projecting it,
Right.
but yet they're the ones who really support it.
Sure. Oh, but let's take this a step further. Let's use Sharia law to make quite vividly clear what kind of war on women, what a real war on women is. Under Sharia law, the only evidence that counts is oral evidence. You can't have written evidence, you can't have DNA evidence. So you can have DNA evidence showing that a man raped a woman, but if there is not 3 to 5 male Muslim witnesses to testify to her being raped, then she wasn't raped. And in fact, she can then be stoned for bringing it upon herself.
And see, the problem with that is those 3 to 5 men who would possibly testify against her, they're not, or on her behalf, they're not going to, because the tenets of Islam would actually prohibit them from doing it, and they could actually be put to death themselves by doing so.
Yeah, because it would be considered false accusation.
Yes.
And again, it goes to this whole thing. They have no written contracts. They have nothing that would be in compliance with our legal system. So every which way you look at it, Sharia law is absolutely contrary and contradictory to the United States Constitution. And as per Article 6, Clause 2, the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Thus, you cannot adopt Sharia law here in the United States. But they're not going to stop pushing at this. They really aren't. Let's think about it. Again, under Sharia law, no freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of assembly or self-defense, no, non-believers only worth half as much as the faithful, no free exercise of religion, non-believers must either convert to Islam, pay a tax, or be put to death. Oh, and by the way, if you leave the faith of Islam, you should be beheaded, according to Sharia law. Does this really sound like the type of system that would work in a nation of laws, not of men? I don't think so.
No, but it also allows you to bear false witness against individuals, because the taqiyya under the Quran allows a believer to actually behave like a non-believer in order to perpetuate the agenda of Islam.
Yeah.
Now, how does that work? Here in the United States, under our laws, that's called falsifying reports.
Yeah.
Lying, perjury.
Perjury, absolutely perjury.
So,
criminal conspiracy.
Absolutely.
There's so many avenues where this is just violative of our law and of the law of most civilized nations. When you can sit there and say somebody has less value to their life because they follow a religion that's different than yours, there is something wrong with that. Absolutely something wrong with that. That is twisted, that is wicked, that is evil. That is the type of deceptive nonsense that could really destroy a country, and yet you have these people that claim that they're all for tolerance, that they're all for coexistence, that they're all for being friendly, welcoming to these people. Well, these people are not going to return those sentiments. They are going to take the knife, they are going to stab you in the back, and they are going to twist it until you bleed to death. And you're going to thank them for it if you're going to keep buying into this political correctness nonsense. It is absolute lunacy, and it will only lead to detrimental consequences for the country. And that's why I find it so disgusting that there's even an attempt to bring Sharia law into our family law system here in America. I believe that it's been attempted in Florida. I believe that it's been attempted in your state, in Michigan.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know whether it has actually gone to full fruition in Michigan or not.
I'm not familiar if it has or not yet.
Yeah, but just the notion that it has even been suggested, that is intolerable, unacceptable, should not be allowed in a free country. It absolutely should not.
Well, and again, all the contradictions that we've spoken about, and if we have more time, we could definitely we could go on and on for hours, weeks even. It's just the whole notion that our listeners, that I hope they take away from this, that our Constitution is the supreme law of the land, meaning that there is no higher law enforceable by man than our Constitution here in this country. Period. That's all there is to it. Because no other law has any standing. Nothing has any standing that is not in pursuance of the Constitution. And when I say pursuance, let's break that word down. This is a fun game, folks. Pursuance is the act of following. The act of following. Actionably engaging in following or going after something. In pursuance of the Constitution. All laws must follow the Constitution. Period. You cannot have another rule of law come in and implemented because of what? Religious beliefs? I'm sorry, but when you exercise your constitutional rights, your freedom of religion, and it is done so at the detriment and infringement of other individuals' rights, you are no longer exercising your rights. You are committing a crime. Plain and simple. That's all there is to it. Your rights end where others begin, and vice versa.
And isn't that just the greatest thing about our system? The cynical liberal, and I hate using that term, but that's what they've tried to do with their semantics again. But let's just say the cynical socialist, your typical utopian Bernie Sanders socialist, would sit there and try and say, well, no, we don't really have fundamental and unalienable rights when you have a criminal justice system that's just there trying to rip it away from people. No, the reason that the criminal justice system is the way that it is to correct the behavior of those who have encroached upon the rights of others. That is the only case where your rights can be encroached because you have lost those rights. But it still has to be adjudicated in a court of law in front of a jury of your peers beyond a reasonable doubt. That is far much more protection than you'd ever get under the code of Sharia law. It
absolutely.
is absolutely more protection than you get under any of these Islamic codes. Hell, it's more protection than you'd get under the Napoleonic Code.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the idea behind this whole notion of the presumption of innocence. You're presumed to still have your rights because no one can rightfully take that away unless you have acted in a way in which you have denied someone else their fundamental and unalienable rights. And it's just as you said. If your rights end where someone else's begins. And that's really not a difficult concept, nor is it a radical concept for us to be saying that that is the way things ought to be, because that is the way that this country was founded. And it's all throughout the Constitution. Think back to when we mentioned the preamble to the Bill of Rights. It spoke clearly to this.
Sure.
And then all of the Bill of Rights speak clearly to this. Every part within the four corners of the United States Constitution speaks to this. That is the spirit of the law.
And people want to, jump up on this thing about, well, it's equal rights this and equal rights that. You cannot define equal rights any other way than your rights end where others begin, and vice versa. That's equal rights right there. Cut and dry, black and white, pure and simple. That's it.
Right, and equality is not equal outcomes. It's the equal access to your rights. Everyone has the same rights. Everyone has the same ability to use whatever talents they are naturally inherent with to move forward and do the best they can for themselves without the government coming in and impeding it. It does not mean that, it's unfair that capitalist pig has gone out and earned money and taken risks, therefore he should be punished and have his wealth redistributed. Redistributive programs do not work. It is theft. Why? Because it is encroaching upon your fundamental and unalienable right to property.
Sure. You know, I have an idea, Randy, and I think our viewers would, I think they would actually pay to see this, and folks will be happy to sell you tickets for it if we could pull this off. But I say we take Holly Holm, the new UFC champion of the women's division for UFC, that knocked out Ronda Rousey just a couple of days after Ronda Rousey came out in support of Nerdface Sanders, the socialist. So, folks, this is what we need to do. We need to have a whole lot of Holly Holmes, okay? And every time that there's a socialist, we need to knock out the socialists. And I'm not advocating violence here by way of, you know, walking up, oh, you're a socialist, and kicking them up next to their brachial plexus on the side of their neck and knocking them out. No, we need to defeat them with their own game. They want to label us as Islamophobes. They want to label us as being antiquated terrorists and label yours and mine and Randy's Constitution as being an antiquated document. Well, let the games begin. Let's fight fire with fire. Let's start labeling their stuff, their hypocrisies, their doctrines, their ideologies. Let's start putting labels on those just to show the world exactly how they operate. See,
and we can start by calling them terrorist files or terror files. They love terrorism. They obviously love terrorism and terrorists. That's why they want to unleash it upon us by the thousands. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
And again, one only has to look at history. I go back to Adolf Hitler and I go back to Joseph Goebbels. Their tactics and how they utilized propaganda. If you go and read, and I'm not trying to push Nazism or anything like that on anybody. I just want people to understand those principles of propaganda, how they were utilized for evil, the same way they could be utilized for good, preserving and maintaining our constitutional rights, our freedoms and liberties, and our birthrights as United States citizens. Those very same tactics need to be and must be used against these that want to strip us of our sovereignty.
And, you know, we've got to go out there and talk about the truth. We've got to show the truth. And, again, the only way that you're going to be able to show the truth is to gain a fluent working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. Again, folks, that's why we do this here. We are doing this to empower you, because when you are empowered with that knowledge, you are able to stand up to anyone that would want to put your life in jeopardy or would want to strip you of your fundamental and unalienable rights and say no. No, it's such a powerful word, and it needs to be utilized more, because what we are seeing with respect to this regime, I can't even call it an administration. It is a regime. This regime wants to unleash these refugees on us, which would lead us to even more demands for opening up our legal system to Sharia law. And then, what do you know, when they've been out on the streets, they've already said that they want to turn the White House into the Black House of ISIS, to have that black flag flying above the White House. And remember, folks, Islam, what does that word mean? It actually means submission to the will of Allah. Well, no. We are free-thinking individuals endowed with fundamental and unalienable rights. We do not submit to anyone. Never. We never have. We never will. As long as there is breath in our lungs, we will not capitulate or bow down to these potentates and these despots and these tyrants, because we know that our system works. Hell, all you have to do to see the proof of that is to know that our United States Constitution is the longest contiguous constitutional document in world history. Let's not tamper with that. Let's not replace that with an ideology that's twisted backwards and completely wicked.
And I'm going to say this right now. If any of these ISIS members, ISIL, any of these terrorists think for a minute, even a second, that you're going to come to the United States and you're going to impose your evil will upon us and you're going to make us convert, you're signing.
You have another thing coming.
You are signing your death warrant. You might as well get that thought out of your head, and then immediately after it passes through your beady, unscrupulous little troglodytic minds, go ahead and hit your button, because you'll be doing yourself and everybody else a favor, and it'll save me a hell of a lot of money on ammo. Because guess what's going to happen? You come here, it will be the last thing that you do. I guarantee it. You might want to go look up what the Admiral Yamamoto said. To invade the United States would be folly, because behind every blade of grass there would be a sniper. Well, I'll tell you what. 70 years later, guess what? That one sniper behind a blade of grass has now multiplied to at least 10 to 100. You don't have a chance.
Here's a thought. You know, since they want to follow the words of a prophet so much, why don't they follow the prophet of Jim Jones? Why don't they go down to Jonestown? Why don't they, pray to him 5 times a day and then drink anthrax-laced Kool-Aid? ISIS, this is the greatest thing you could do. You really want to scare us here in the West? Go down to Jonestown. Where was that? In Guyana? I think it was.
Yeah, somewhere.
Yeah. Go down to that colony. You can look it up on the internet. I know you guys have the internet because you go to Twitter and all that other stuff. Go to Jonestown. Make that special batch of Kool-Aid and meet the prophet even faster. You could get your 72 angry Virginians, 72 virgins, by doing that. Just do it. Do it. We would really be frightened, terrified.
Yeah. And again, make no mistake about it. I'm a United States citizen. I'm an American. I bow to no one, and you will not, I repeat, you will not scare me, intimidate me, or think that you're going to smite my life away from me. You're not big enough. I don't care how many of you think you are. It will not happen.
Yeah, and the enemies of humanity cannot and will not win. And the reason I say this is because we operate under the truth. When you operate under the truth, it sets you free. And the truth is absolute. It's timeless. Just like all of the fundamental natural law principles and tenets contained within the 4 corners of our shared United States Constitution, it is timeless. This wicked deception, this barbarism put on display like what we saw in Paris back on Friday, no, that is not acceptable. That it will not be tolerated, and we won't stand for it here in the United States. Jeremy is absolutely right, and we have to be stalwart and steadfast in this, because otherwise they're going to attempt to wipe us out. Make no mistake about it. They are not looking to coexist. In fact, I saw a great political cartoon with reference to that. It showed one of the ISIS members that was in Paris cutting up the coexist banner to just have the crescent, the symbol of Allah, the moon god. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Don't think that this is the same Abrahamic God that we have, because it's not. Absolutely not. History proves that it is not. But they don't want you to know this. That's another one of those little propagandistic things that they try and shove down our throats.
Yeah. So again, all of you ISIS members, all of you jihadis, this is the only time you're going to be told. the only time. Get the little thoughts out of your head, and when you're done thinking about your little thoughts, go ahead and press the button and do so within the confines of your own little mud hut or cave, wherever you're dwelling, and do yourself and the world a favor. It'll go a lot easier on you. This is a promise.
Because otherwise, every bullet is going to be smeared in pork grease.
Already is.
Yeah.
They already
absolutely.
are. And blood.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, we here at the Wright Flyer believe that it is so important that we empower you with giving you the tools necessary for you to gain a fluent working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. That is the most important service that we can render to you, and that is why we go on and do these shows. We do it for you. Now, with that said, it is time to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. So
Okay.
drink up, especially if you have Muslim neighbors. You might want to offer them some alcohol as well so that they can break out of their little Sharia law thing there. Once
I'm
again,
gonna go ahead and go open up the cargo bay doors. We've got a bunch of dead pigs that we're gonna do airdrop over Raqqa.
Special delivery. Special delivery. Yes, absolutely. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Randy Wright, and as always, joining me as the first officer is Jeremy Grapington. We appreciate you coming on. We invite you to leave comments either on Google Plus page, on our Facebook page, or on our YouTube page. Once again, thank you for flying with the Wright Flyer, and we are now going to bring it home. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying the Wright Flyer.